The grand revolving doors of the Thompson Grand Hotel whispered open with a soft whoosh, ushering in the cool evening air and a woman who looked entirely out of place among the polished marble floors and glistening chandeliers. Her name was Sarah Thompson, a 32-year-old art teacher from Portland, Oregon. She stood quietly for a moment just inside the lobby, adjusting the strap of her worn canvas backpack on one shoulder, her fingers still speckled with dried paint from that afternoon's community art class. Her outfit, though clean, bore the marks of a long, meaningful day. A soft gray t-shirt, slightly smudged with blue and yellow acrylic, peeked out from under a light denim jacket. Her jeans, faded at the knees, and old white sneakers told a story not of wealth, but of purpose. A gray and white trucker cap sat snug over her brown ponytail, shadowing her thoughtful eyes. Around her, luxury pulsed like a quiet symphony. A grand piano in the corner filled the space with a soft, familiar rendition of Clair de Lune. Guests in tailored suits and cocktail dresses sipped champagne and laughed in polite tones. A waiter glided past her with a silver tray of canapés, offering none. Sarah's presence didn't command attention, it challenged expectations. She took a breath and stepped toward the mahogany reception desk. It stood high and gleaming, a centerpiece under a massive crystal chandelier that cast golden light like rain across the floor. She could feel the weight of tiredness in her shoulders. It had been a 10-hour day at the community center, helping kids express their struggles and hopes through paint and clay. The thought of driving the 2 hours back to her and her husband's countryside home near Mount Hood had felt unbearable. Just 30 minutes earlier, her husband, James Thompson, had called. His voice, always calm, always warm, had offered a simple solution. "Stay at the hotel tonight, sweetheart. I'll call ahead and have everything arranged." He'd built this hotel chain from the ground up, brick by brick, floor by floor, and though their lives often moved in different circles, they'd always respected each other's space. Sarah had insisted on keeping her independence, and James admired that. They didn't flaunt their marriage. Most of his staff probably didn't even know what she looked like, and that never bothered her. Still, as she reached the desk and was met by the sharp glances of the two receptionists, Sarah couldn't help but feel the pressure of being out of place. She smiled gently, steadying her voice. "Good evening," she began. "My name is Sarah Thompson. My husband should have called about a room for me." The man behind the desk, whose gold name tag read Brandon, offered a tight, polite smile. His eyes, however, drifted down to her clothes with barely concealed judgment. Next to him, a younger woman named Ashley offered no greeting at all. The quiet grandeur of the lobby now felt colder. Sarah stood tall, her dignity wrapped not in designer labels, but in the confidence of someone who knew who she was, even if no one else in that room did. Sarah Thompson stood at the front desk of the Thompson Grand Hotel, the quiet elegance of the lobby humming behind her like a well-rehearsed symphony. But the reception she received was anything but harmonious. Brandon, the sharply dressed front desk clerk, leaned slightly forward. His navy blazer was perfectly tailored, his tie pinned with a subtle gold clip that shimmered under the chandelier's glow. He took one look at Sarah, her paint-stained t-shirt, her backpack, the faded jeans, and his pleasant expression stiffened like drying plaster. "I'm sorry," he said slowly, the words wrapped in practiced courtesy, "but could you please provide identification, ma'am?" "Of course," Sarah replied without hesitation. She slipped her wallet from her backpack and handed him her Oregon driver's license. "Sarah Thompson. My husband, James Thompson, called ahead. He owns this hotel." Brandon examined the ID as though it might be counterfeit, squinting ever so slightly, then tilted it to show Ashley, the other receptionist. Ashley's expression didn't change, but her arched brow said more than words. Brandon set the ID down without looking at Sarah. "And you say Mr. Thompson arranged a room for you?" His tone made it sound like she had just claimed to be the president's niece. "Yes," Sarah replied, calm but firm. "About 30 minutes ago." Ashley leaned in, her voice slightly lower but still audible to the nearby guests. "This is a 5-star property, ma'am. Perhaps there's been some confusion." Sarah's face flushed, not from shame, but from the sting of being dismissed so easily. "There's no confusion," she said, still keeping her voice composed. "James Thompson is my husband. He told me to come here and rest tonight. He said he'd let you know." Brandon tapped the keyboard dramatically, then looked up with faux sympathy. "There's no reservation under the name Thompson. And we have no record of a call from Mr. Thompson either. I'm afraid we're fully booked this evening." Sarah's chest tightened. Not from anxiety, but from the quiet humiliation of being treated like an intruder in her own husband's hotel. She looked over her shoulder. A few guests had begun to watch, some curious, some disapproving. One older gentleman furrowed his brow, sensing the tension. "Could you please call him?" she asked. "Or at least contact the general manager on duty." Ashley gave a small, condescending laugh. "Mr. Thompson is one of the most powerful business people in the country. He doesn't take calls from walk-ins wearing trucker caps." At that moment, Sarah realized this wasn't just a mistake, it was a lesson. One she had experienced many times in small ways, but never like this. Her clothes had spoken louder than her words. Her simple appearance had rendered her invisible, even suspect, to people trained to see luxury only through the lens of wealth and appearance. "I'd like to wait here," Sarah said evenly. "My husband will be here soon." Brandon narrowed his eyes. "If you refuse to leave, we'll have to call security." From behind, the soft thud of polished shoes on marble echoed toward the desk. Sarah didn't turn, not yet. She stood still, dignified, weary, but unwavering, as the storm gathered around her. As Sarah stood her ground at the front desk, the mood in the lobby of the Thompson Grand Hotel began to shift. The once ambient murmur of piano music and clinking glass had softened into curious silence. More guests now glanced in her direction, some openly watching, others pretending not to, though their eyes lingered far longer than politeness allowed. Brandon, the front desk clerk, straightened his blazer and spoke just a bit louder, his words now intended for more than just Sarah. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, voice heavy with disbelief, "is a philanthropist, a former model. She attended the Met Gala last year, if I'm not mistaken." Ashley crossed her arms and added, "She certainly doesn't show up in paint-stained jeans and a trucker hat." A few quiet chuckles drifted from nearby. A woman in a cocktail dress whispered to her husband, "She thinks she's married to James Thompson? What a scam." He nodded, clearly entertained. Sarah felt her cheeks grow warm, not from embarrassment for herself, but from the injustice of it all. She wasn't just being denied a room, she was being denied her identity. "I'm not claiming to be his wife," she said, voice steady despite the growing tension. "I am his wife." He called ahead. "He told me to rest here tonight." Ashley's polished smile cracked, revealing the sharpness behind it. "Listen, we get people like you sometimes. Claiming to be part of the Thompson family to get a free room or special treatment. It's not going to work here." Sarah's spine straightened. She had taught shy children how to speak through art. She had stood up to bureaucrats who tried to defund her program. And she had learned, over and over again, that when people refused to see you, you had to speak louder with your presence than with your voice. "Please call the general manager," she requested calmly. Brandon shook his head. "He's out of state for a conference. I'm the senior staff member on duty. And frankly, we're very busy with real guests." He gestured toward the growing line behind her. It was then that Ashley said it. The words came out cold, precise, and unmistakable. "We don't serve your kind here." A hush fell over the lobby. Even Brandon looked stunned by her bluntness. "My kind?" Sarah asked, repeating the phrase not out of confusion, but out of disbelief. Brandon tried to recover. "She means people trying to cheat the system, people pretending to be something they're not." A security guard, middle-aged, built like a former football coach, arrived at the desk. His name tag read Mike. "This woman is refusing to leave," Brandon explained. "She's causing a scene and making false claims." "I'm not causing a scene," Sarah said. "I'm standing here, calmly, asking for the room my husband told me would be ready." Mike reached gently for her elbow. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." The shame, the judgment, the looks from strangers who didn't know her story, it all pressed down on Sarah like the weight of 100 eyes. But she didn't cry. She didn't shout. Instead, she looked straight ahead, her voice even and strong. "You're making a very big mistake." And at that exact moment, the revolving doors at the front of the hotel turned with a soft whoosh, and in walked James Thompson. The soft whirl of the hotel's revolving doors echoed like a trumpet call through the hushed lobby. In stepped a tall, distinguished man with salt and pepper hair, sharp navy suit, and the confident stride of someone used to commanding boardrooms and billion-dollar negotiations. James Thompson, founder and CEO of Thompson Grand Hotels, had arrived, and without yet knowing it, was about to witness something that would shake him to his core. He had flown in from Chicago on a late afternoon flight, eager to surprise his wife and maybe share a quiet dinner in the rooftop restaurant before another early morning of back-to-back meetings. But the sight that greeted him was not the peaceful elegance he was known for curating in every one of his properties. Instead, he saw Sarah, his wife of 5 years, standing rigid at the front desk with a security guard gripping her elbow. Her face, usually calm and warm, looked flushed, her lips pressed into a thin line. Around her, an audience had gathered, hotel guests in pearls and tuxedos, watching the scene unfold like spectators at a play. James's eyes flicked over the expressions of the staff, Brandon, looking puffed up with authority, Ashley, arms folded smugly, and the security guard, Mike, who looked unsure but dutiful. And then he looked back at Sarah, his Sarah, still in her paint-smudged clothes and dusty sneakers, standing tall amidst humiliation. He walked quietly across the marble floor, each step echoing louder in the silence. Sarah saw him first. She didn't call out, didn't wave her arms or announce him like a knight in shining armor had come to rescue her. She simply held his gaze, and he saw it, relief, frustration, and pride all in one look. James stepped beside Mike and gently placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "Excuse me," he said, voice low and calm, "is there a problem here?" Mike turned, clearly surprised, and his expression instantly shifted from firm professionalism to wide-eyed recognition. "Mr. Thompson." Sir, we didn't." "You can let go of my wife now, Mike." The words dropped into the room like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the lobby. Brandon's face drained of color. Ashley took an involuntary step backward. James turned to Sarah, his voice soft now. "Are you all right?" She nodded, the tension in her shoulders easing just a bit. "I'm fine," she said quietly. "Just a little surprised at how your hotel handles guests who don't dress the part." James looked around slowly, taking in every face. His gaze lingered on Brandon and Ashley, who now stood frozen, like statues caught mid-lie. "Brandon," James said, his tone shifting into something heavier. Ashley, I'd like to speak with both of you in my office. Immediately. He turned to the lobby, raising his voice just enough to be heard without shouting. For those of you watching, he said, this hotel was built on the principle that every person deserves to be treated with dignity. Clearly, that principle has been forgotten today. Then, gently, he placed his arm around Sarah's shoulders. Come on, he whispered. Let's get you that room. And a glass of wine. And just like that, the power dynamic in the room shifted, not because of wealth or reputation, but because someone had finally stood up, not just for his wife, but for the values they both believed in. The private elevator ride to James Thompson's executive office on the top floor of the Thompson Grand Hotel was silent. Sarah stood next to her husband, arms crossed, not in anger, but in quiet reflection. James gently squeezed her hand. No words were needed between them, not yet. Inside the corner office, glass windows framed a panoramic view of Portland's skyline bathed in the golden hues of sunset. The office, with its modern furnishings and walnut desk, looked like the nerve center of a luxury empire. But at that moment, it felt more like a courtroom. Brandon, Ashley, and Mike stood stiffly in front of James's desk. Sarah sat in a soft leather chair off to the side, still in her paint-splattered clothes and sneakers, yet somehow the most dignified person in the room. James remained standing, hands on his desk. His tone wasn't angry, it was worse. It was disappointed. I built this company from nothing, he began, his voice measured. 15 years ago, I renovated an old roadside motel off I-84 with just 28 rooms. I was the janitor, the night manager, and the bellhop. He walked to a nearby bookshelf and lifted a framed photo. It showed a younger James, in jeans and a tool belt, standing proudly in front of that first humble motel. My father was a school custodian, he continued, and my mother worked 2 jobs, one of them waitressing the graveyard shift at a diner. We weren't wealthy, but we were proud. And we judged people by how they treated others, not how they dressed. Brandon opened his mouth to speak, but James raised a hand. Let me be clear, he said. What happened today wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a reflection of bias. Of assuming that someone who looks like my wife, someone in jeans and a hat, isn't worthy of respect. He turned to Ashley. You said, we don't serve your kind here. You may not realize it, but that sentence has a long, painful history in this country. It echoes a time when people were denied service based on the color of their skin, their accent, or their clothing. That kind of thinking has no place in this company, or anywhere else. Ashley looked visibly shaken. I didn't mean it like that, sir, she said softly. I thought she was scamming us. That's exactly the problem, Sarah said, her voice calm but clear. You thought you knew who I was based on how I looked. But what if I weren't married to James? Would I still be asked to leave? Would I still be treated like a nuisance? Mike, the security guard, looked down at the floor. Ma'am, I was just following protocol. Protocol, James repeated. A protocol that tells you to remove someone who isn't yelling, isn't causing harm, just doesn't look the part. He turned back to the group. This isn't about punishing you. It's about making sure this never happens again, to anyone. Whether they're a CEO's wife or someone who just saved up for a weekend getaway. Then he looked to Sarah. She nodded slowly, eyes softening. This isn't just about me, she said. It's about how we treat people when no one important is watching. That's the real test of character. The room was quiet again, but now, it carried the weight of truth. Brandon, Ashley, and Mike stood like statues, waiting for the final blow. The silence in James Thompson's office was thick with dread. They had been expecting, perhaps even bracing for, the words, "You're fired." But James didn't say them. He looked at each of them in turn, then slowly walked back around his desk. Sarah sat quietly, watching with the calm of someone who understood that real change didn't always come from punishment, but from learning. "I'm not going to fire you," James said finally. The weight of the moment shifted immediately. Shoulders that had been clenched with fear relaxed just slightly. Brandon blinked. "Sir, you're not?" "No," James replied. "Firing you would be easy. It would protect the company's image, make headlines, and satisfy the public. But it wouldn't fix the problem. And I care more about fixing the problem than putting a bandage on it." Ashley looked confused. "So, what happens now?" James leaned forward. "You're going to help me change this company from the inside out." He turned to Brandon first. "As duty manager, the tone you set affects everyone under you. Tomorrow morning, you'll begin working with our human resources team to help design a new training program. One that emphasizes not just customer service, but respect, especially toward people who don't fit your idea of a luxury guest." Brandon swallowed hard but nodded. "Yes, sir." James faced Ashley. "You're being temporarily reassigned to our community outreach program. You'll be working with local nonprofits to connect our hotels with real people, folks who've never stepped inside a five-star property. Maybe when you hear their stories, you'll stop assuming things based on clothing or posture." Ashley, humbled, gave a quiet "yes, sir," barely above a whisper. Then James looked at Mike. "You followed protocol. But our protocol failed today. So you'll help rewrite it. Starting next week, you'll be working directly with our Director of Security to create new guidelines, ones that protect guests without profiling them." Mike, who had spent 20 years in the security field, looked James in the eye. "I appreciate that, sir. I really do." Sarah finally stood. She walked toward the three employees, not with anger, but with a gentle firmness that reflected years of guiding children through difficult emotions. "I'm not angry," she said. "I'm disappointed in a system that taught you that someone like me didn't belong here. But disappointment is a beginning, not an ending. If you're willing to grow, this could be the moment everything changes." James nodded in agreement. "One more thing. Each of you will spend a day volunteering at my wife's community art program. I want you to meet the children she serves. Some of them wear second-hand shoes. Some don't speak much English. Some don't have homes to go back to. But they are full of dignity, and they deserve to be seen." The room was quiet again, but this time, it wasn't fear that filled the air. It was something else. Understanding. Hope. The first flickers of transformation. "This company," James added, "will no longer be known only for its chandeliers or rooftop views, but for how it makes every guest feel seen, safe, and respected." And just like that, the real work began. 3 months had passed since that fateful evening in the lobby of the Thompson Grand Hotel, and the transformation was nothing short of remarkable. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Sarah Thompson stood quietly in the same grand lobby where she had once been humiliated. But today, the atmosphere felt different, not just to her, but to everyone who walked through those doors. There was still the same sparkle of crystal chandeliers overhead, the same plush armchairs and floral arrangements that filled the room with understated luxury. Yet, beneath all that polish, something deeper had changed. Across the room, Brandon, once stiff and judgmental, now stood at the front desk, speaking warmly to an elderly woman in a floral house dress. Her suitcase was patched at the seams, and her shoes were worn, but Brandon greeted her with the same respect he might have once reserved for a celebrity. He walked around the desk, offered her his arm, and personally escorted her to the elevator with a smile. Sarah watched quietly, her lips curving into a proud smile. James appeared beside her, coffee in hand, his suit jacket slung over one arm. "Hard to believe, isn't it?" he said softly. She nodded. "Night and day." "And the numbers back it up," James added. "Guest satisfaction scores are up 23% across the board. We're getting messages from people saying they've never felt more seen or valued at a hotel in their lives." What began as a personal reckoning had become a company-wide movement. The new initiative, Respect First, had rolled out across all 31 Thompson properties in the U.S., with plans to expand internationally by spring. And the most surprising champion of the program? Brandon himself. "He's leading another training seminar this afternoon," James said. "Requested to take it to our Miami location next month." Sarah chuckled. "I guess some people just needed a second chance, and a little perspective." Near the concierge desk, Ashley emerged from the back office, walking beside a teenage boy in a wheelchair. His eyes were nervous but bright. Ashley carried a folder and a staff badge. "Mrs. Thompson," she called out, guiding the young man over. "This is Marcus, he's starting in our culinary internship today." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Marcus. I remember you from art class. You have an incredible eye for design, you're going to do great in the kitchen." James stepped forward, shaking the teen's hand. "Our executive chef is already excited to meet you." After Ashley led Marcus toward the kitchen entrance, Sarah's gaze shifted to the security desk. Mike, now head of guest safety and experience, stood tall in his new role. The hotel's security protocols had been rewritten entirely under his guidance, balancing guest safety with dignity. He now trained every new guard, using his own missteps as a teaching tool. James looked at his wife, a sense of quiet admiration in his expression. "It all started with you, you know." Sarah shrugged, linking her arm through his. "It started with a mistake. But we turned it into something better." As they walked toward the entrance, the new bronze plaque caught Sarah's eye. It read, "At Thompson Grand Hotels, we judge no one by appearance, but value everyone by their dignity, their story, and their humanity." As the glass doors of the Thompson Grand Hotel quietly slid open, Sarah and James Thompson stepped out into the crisp Oregon air. The sun cast a golden hue over the downtown sidewalks, where people from all walks of life moved about their day, some in business suits, others in work boots, a few pushing strollers or wheelchairs. And in that moment, Sarah realized something profound. The change they had sparked was no longer confined to marble floors and five-star lobbies. It had begun with a painful experience, one rooted in judgment, assumption, and subtle cruelty. But through accountability, compassion, and a refusal to meet ignorance with vengeance, something far greater had emerged. A cultural shift. A new kind of standard. One that didn't measure a guest by the cut of their coat or the weight of their wallet, but by their shared human dignity. Inside the hotel lobby, the new bronze plaque gleamed beneath the chandeliers. Guests often paused to read it, some taking pictures, others simply nodding in appreciation. The quote at the bottom, Sarah's favorite, by Maya Angelou, read, "We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike." That single sentence had become the guiding light of the Respect First initiative. And it was working. Across the Thompson hotel chain, from Seattle to Charleston, stories had begun to emerge. A single mother in Denver who was given a warm welcome and free childcare while she attended a job interview. A veteran in Dallas offered a quiet place to rest and a handwritten thank you note for his service. A teenager with autism in Atlanta, nervous and unsure, paired with a mentor from the hotel staff who helped him grow into a confident intern. Even guests were different now. The very incident that had once drawn whispers of mockery in a grand lobby had inspired honest reflection among longtime patrons. Mrs. Pembroke, the well-dressed woman who had tried, though timidly, to speak up that night 3 months ago, had become one of the initiative's biggest supporters. That afternoon, she approached Sarah in the lobby, her step purposeful, her smile warm. "Mrs. Thompson," she began, "I wanted to thank you for what you stood for that night. I've stayed in luxury hotels around the world, but this is the first place I've ever seen with a soul." Sarah, caught off guard, blinked. "Thank me? My granddaughter volunteers at your art program now," Mrs. Pembroke continued. "She says it's changed her life." Sarah smiled, emotion flickering across her face. She looked over at James, who reached for her hand. "This was never just about one hotel," Sarah said as they stepped outside. "It was about what happens when people are treated with kindness and fairness. Those little moments ripple outward. You never know whose life you're affecting." James nodded, his voice quiet. And all because one woman walked into a hotel in paint-splattered jeans and refused to be judged by her appearance. They paused at the corner, watching a young street artist sketching portraits with charcoal. Sarah approached him, complimented his technique, and struck up a conversation about shading and light. And just like that, another connection was made, another quiet moment of respect in a world that desperately needed more of it. This story serves as a powerful reminder that dignity isn't defined by appearance, wealth, or status. It's something every human being inherently deserves. Sarah Thompson, a humble art teacher, was judged harshly based on her clothes rather than her character. But through calm strength and integrity, she not only stood her ground but helped spark a cultural shift in an entire organization. For those of us who've lived through decades of change, social, cultural, and personal, this story touches a familiar truth. We've all seen how easily people are dismissed for looking different or less than. Yet as we age, we learn that true worth lies in compassion, respect, and how we treat others when no one is watching. This lesson is timeless. Whether you're welcoming someone into your home, interacting with a stranger in a waiting room, or mentoring the next generation, remember, a kind word and an open mind can go farther than we ever imagine. In a world quick to judge, choosing dignity for ourselves and others may be the most powerful legacy we leave behind.